Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. Today, we're going to be taking a look at empathy and technology with two special guests. Quickly, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to Neximo, our sponsors. Neximo supplies APIs for SMS, voice, verification, and you know what? They just do a ton of really fun things. You can thank them for sponsoring us over on Twitter at NeximoDev or check out their products at neximo.com. I'm your host, Jessica Rose.
I'm here today with
Naomi Freeman. I'm a software engineer and programming instructor.
Very exciting. We're also joined today by
Coraline Imke. I'm a speaker, writer, open source advocate, and technologist.
How exciting to have you both with us. Today, we're going to be focusing on empathy and technology, and this is something I'm really excited about. Our listeners a couple months back may have gotten a chance to hear April come on and talk about compassionate coding and sort of the need to be human in a technological space. And I was so excited to have you two come on so we could dig deeper specifically into empathy. Could you each tell me a little bit about your backgrounds and how you came to work together to look at specifically empathy and technology?
Sure. I had an idea for a book. We're writing a book called Compassionate Coder, Practicing Empathy in Software Development.
You're writing a whole book about empathy together.
Yes, we are.
Oh, how very convenient.
Yeah, I had the idea a couple of years ago, and I actually started writing with a gentleman named Ernie Miller, who talks a lot about humane coding practices. And for various personal reasons, he wasn't able to continue with the book. So it kind of sat on my desktop for a while, and my guilt around not writing it built. And then last October, I realized this was the book that really needed to be written and really needed to be read by people in our industry. So I went looking for a co-author, and I auditioned some different people, and Naomi is one of the people that reached out to me, and I read her writing and was really impressed. So we've been collaborating ever since.
That's so exciting. Naomi, how did you, we've heard a little bit about how you got into it, but what brought you to be really interested in focusing on empathy and technology?
Well, in my life before technology, my university degree was actually in creative writing and philosophy. And during my time at school, I was involved in a lot of extracurriculars, a lot of organizing volunteers, and I ended up on the Obama campaign as a fellow. And a lot of that was really about tangible empathy and creating action from that. So I took all of that with me into technology. And for a few years, I was really just mastering how to code and how to work in a tech company and those sorts of things. But when I found this opportunity to sort of return to things I knew deeply and was very passionate about, I knew I just absolutely had to jump on and get going with this.
How fantastic. So I'm really interested in asking about a hurdle that may or may not be common when you talk to people about empathy and technology. I think if you came up to me and you're like, Jess, I'm going to teach you how to be more empathetic. I think maybe my knee-jerk, very self-defensive reaction might be, well, I'm empathetic. Is this sort of a common hurdle you all face? And how, if at all, would you get over that?
I think the more common thinking is that empathy is something that you either have a lot of or don't have a lot of. People think of it as an attribute of your personality, when in reality, empathy is a practice. It's something that's difficult to learn. It's about emotions and intuition, which we're encouraged to ignore as software developers. But it's a practice. It's something that is teachable, that is learnable, and that is really valuable.
I would say the other hurdle is in business practice in general. So along with my other bunch of things, I've recently completed my MBA. And so I have a lot of business thinking as well that I bring to this. And there's kind of this thinking that's like, well, where do you put empathy in a workplace? I'm busy. And in technology, when you say I'm busy making money, that's a very believable statement. And if it's working, then, why fix it? So I think that's kind of the other hurdle is what is the business case for empathy? And I would say our book approaches this in a lot of different ways, but it's much larger than just interpersonal empathy. I'm an empathetic person or you are. It's about kind of using a lens of empathy to create more integrated teams, to create better work practices and structures and processes that are going to make your business more effective.
So that's a really interesting point. Let's say that our dear listener, our dear listener is wonderfully empathetic and massively cares about this. Let's say our dear listener's manager isn't convinced. They're like, well, you're either empathetic or you're not. And besides, we're busy. We're making money. We're shipping software. Yeah. How could our dear listener, make a business case? What's sort of the elevator pitch for better connecting and better understanding other humans?
There are a lot of different levels to it, but one of the things that we do get into is that empathy is more than just the emotional component of things. There's also a lot of cognitive parts of it. So you can approach it as a practice. But coming back to the idea of a business case, the simplest one is when teams are more integrated and know what's going on in other teams and can understand it and be in their shoes, research shows you make more money because everyone feels understood. They know what they're working towards, and they understand how they fit into that context and how other people fit into that context. And working like that is just operating with an empathy lens.
And there are other tangible benefits too. I mean, Naomi's talking about empathy within a working environment, but also we have to focus on empathy for end users. And I think there's a real misunderstanding about who our end users are. I think that we tend to self-identify as our target users. And if you are a software developer today, you're working with the latest MacBook Pro with tons of memory, with tons of processor speed, and you're not thinking about the use case of someone who has a 5-year-old laptop, someone who doesn't have the latest hardware. You're creating an experience for them that is shutting them out from using your product and from, in some cases, even like being a good citizen in the online world.
That's a really fantastic point. So you're telling me I can't just scribble down on a piece of paper with a stock photo, as a user, I want to in 2 sentences, that I need to, as an individual technologist, and in a larger part as a team, fully engage with different levels of empathy, different types of users, and folks we may have not even thought of as our users.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I grew up in a small town in Virginia. The town had 500 people in it when I lived there, and it's even smaller now. And my parents don't have high-speed internet. They have a satellite uplink for internet. And when I go to visit them, my father always gets really angry at me because their bandwidth is capped. And just from having the kind of apps that we are accustomed to having open all the time, I make him hit his bandwidth cap. And we don't think about, when we're a Silicon Valley company, we're thinking about people with iPhones and people with persistent internet connections and high-speed connections. And there's a vast swath of the country that we are not serving at all because of those assumptions.
That's a really fantastic point, that when we're looking to make empathetic connections with potential users or our users, that a lot of times the folks we never stop to think about in the first place can be a big blocker to us. Are there any ways to sort of extend your perspective or extend your perspective as a team?
We write in the book about in-group and out-group empathy. And the basic idea is that, and studies have actually demonstrated this, some really startling studies, that we tend to practice empathy on people that we relate to as being similar to ourselves. There was a really interesting study that was conducted in China where participants in a study were shown pictures of people in painful situations. And the empathy response in the brain, which is actually measurable, was paid attention to while these pictures were shown. And the study demonstrated that when the Chinese participants were shown pictures of Chinese people in painful situations, it triggered a stronger empathy response than when they saw white Americans in painful situations. So in-group, out-group empathy is very, very real. And if we're not identifying with people who are different from us, then we're not able to empathize with them, and therefore we're not able to serve them with the technologies that we create.
How would you go ahead and extend that, though, if we're saying, you know what, the individual members in our team are only able, I suppose, almost hardwired? How do they do the test? It's not an invasive brain check. I imagine a scan?
No. The scan, yeah.
Cool.
So the antidote to in-group, out-group empathy is expanding your notion of who the in-group is. And you only get that through exposure. So if you were living in a predominantly white neighborhood with upper middle class people, you're not exposed to people who are different from you, people from different socioeconomic statuses, people who maybe are on the LGBTQ spectrum, people who are Black, or you're not being exposed to people and therefore you don't relate to them. And what happens is, and this has also been studied, it's a de-individualization. You tend to paint people with a very broad brush and think of them as being different from you, and you don't extend your ability to empathize to that group. The antidote is exposure. The antidote is being in groups with diverse participants. That might be a diverse team in a workplace, but also we have to think about diversity in our personal lives. We have to think about the people that we interact with every day, our friends, our fellow citizens, the people all over the world around us who are not like us. If we're not interacting with them, then we can't identify with them.
And the other thing I would say, I mean, what Coraline's talking about is expansive and of course is a larger goal. But inside a tech company day to get started, and it's not your first port of call, but one thing you could do is instead of having a hack days on a Friday morning, get people out and mentoring in the community. And it doesn't have to be code. It can be basketball. It can be literacy stuff. It can be helping moms. You can encourage people to get extra credits or a bonus or something to volunteer in another block of time in some suggested areas that could also create this exposure. And I think things like that work better than workshops. There are workshops, but that's just one touch point. And then, you kind of file it in the back of your head and you walk out of the room and it doesn't go any further. So I think it's more important to create engagement and to reach outside of the company and connect with communities that are around you.
So would it be fair to sum up sort of a wide range of really exciting advice from both of you as hire and maintain diverse teams if you can? And then in addition to that, go ahead and extend your group's reach by having them out interacting with other lovely humans and a diverse range of them where possible.
I would say they go hand in hand, and there's many layers here. But if your current teams are not diverse, they're going to continue perpetuating the same biases that they already have if they're not engaging with the rest of the community and getting that exposure. So I think you kind of have to find a way to get them both going to get them to work.
There was an interesting study that was conducted with members of fraternities and sororities by a social psychologist. I can't think of her name right now, but they presented murder mysteries to homogenous groups. The group would be all fraternity brothers or all sorority sisters. And they asked them to solve this murder mystery. And for half of the groups, half of the homogenous groups, they would introduce one person from an out group, someone who was not part of the Greek system. And they found that the mixed groups were able to solve problems more effectively. And interestingly, it wasn't based on ideas or suggestions that the out-group person brought to the table, but rather it was a result of the discomfort of not having a homogenous group that forced people to be more flexible in their thinking and to actually solve the problems better.
So this is really interesting. I think a lot of times in social situations, and this could just be me living in England for a little bit too long, but we really look for comfort. We really look to try and smooth things over and make things easy. That study seems to suggest that being a little bit uncomfortable is not just only okay, but can potentially be really beneficial.
Yeah, there are measurable cognitive differences between homogenous groups and mixed groups.
Yeah, science. So this is really fantastic. We've touched a lot on the benefits of having empathetic team members, having empathy on the individual level within your teams. I'm wondering, and this is maybe do people still say blue sky thinking?
In the business world, yes, they do.
All right, we're getting super businessy. It's 1994. We work in enterprise. Yeah, this is a little bit blue sky. But what could a more empathetic tech industry look like?
One thing that I sort of talk about in the book is that what I see is technologies kind of swing one way or the other. So, you use technology A and it's really great on desktops and it brings in database stuff, great. But after a while, you find there are some gaps. There are some gaps that you can't put it on mobile, that it doesn't like APIs. I don't know. New technologies kind of come in and the pendulum swings away from technology A towards technology B type things.
We're all using React now. No, quickly to Vue.
Exactly. And the declaration that Ruby is dead. I've been to several Ruby conferences this year. But anyways, I think with business, we're seeing a similar kind of thing. On the left side, where technology A was, we have this capitalism, superpower, high profit, like move fast, break things, break anything, people things, technology things, society things, like just break it.
Disrupt, I think, is generally disrupt it. We'll think about the ethics later.
Exactly. And I think we're starting to see more and more, even though these businesses are still running well in a business sense, we're seeing PR scandals. We're seeing legal issues coming up. We're seeing disenfranchised people. We're seeing burnout. We're seeing all of these challenges. And I think in technology, we know how to make the swing and make a new framework. But I think with this stuff, we haven't quite figured out where the pendulum's supposed to swing to. And that's why we're proposing this sort of empathy lens. The idea is to fill in some of the gaps and do some things better. We're not trying to tear down the entire industry. We're just trying to propose some ways to get the pendulum to swing away from where it's been and towards somewhere that serves a lot more people, a lot more purposes, and optimizes business as it does that, which is a very businessy sort of way to say it, but there you have it.
So you touched on PR nightmares and costs from folks leaving the industry. Like these are very real, tangible things that even in our current lens, even the way we approach the industry now, they make a lot of sense for the bottom line.
Absolutely. And I think that what it comes down to is understanding the values that people have and the understanding of the values that businesses have and aligning the two things together. And I know that I'm speaking from a place of privilege here. I've been in the software industry for over 20 years. I have the luxury of picking the companies that I work at. And when I'm interviewing with a company, I actually do an analysis of their values and see if they line up with my own personal values. People who are earlier in their careers have less of an opportunity to do that. But when I mentor someone who's looking for a job, I always tell them, if you have your choice, work for a company whose values align with your own, because that is where you're going to be able to bring your full self to work and not feel bad about the work you're doing. And also, I think as a senior engineer, I have a responsibility to be that ethical voice, to be the voice of the user, to be the voice of the community, to be the voice of the culture that the software that we're creating is going to be impacting. Because if I don't do it, who will?
So you touched on something I'd really love to dive into a bit deeper, where you say, when I'm looking to move into a new role, I take some time and really look to screen where possible for it matching my values. I think this is really interesting. Could you talk a little bit, or could maybe either of you talk a little bit about how our dear listener might be able to screen for an empathetic workplace or a more empathetic workplace?
I think part of that is the interview process itself. You can look at how the job description was written, first of all. The job description is, in many cases, the first exposure to a given company that a candidate or potential hire has. And we have a sample chapter from our book called Not Applicable, which talks in detail about writing a values-based job description so that you're preparing people for working at a company like yours that values certain things and devalues other things, or that emphasizes certain aspects of its employees for mutual success. And you can look at the interview process itself. Are they requiring you to do a take-home exercise that's going to take you 20 hours? And what does that say about their expectation of your work ethic and how much free time you have, and whether you're a caregiver for someone else? Do you have a family or an older relative you're taking care of, or you're working 2 jobs, or you're working full-time and you don't have the time for a 20-hour code challenge? Are they expecting you to travel to their headquarters for the interview process, perhaps across the country? If so, they're not demonstrating empathy for you as an individual with life responsibilities. So the interview process itself says a lot. And then the questions that you're asked, if the interviewer is doing a good job, the thing they're interviewing for is, will this person bring something to our company that we don't have, or will they reinforce something at our company that we are trying to emphasize further? And you can tell from the questions they ask what it is that they actually value.
So this is really interesting, sort of viewing the application process and the interview process as a real conversation that your potential employer is having with you. Are they giving you lots of things that don't fit? Are they saying things through either their communications or through the job description that don't quite sound right? That's really, really interesting, not just for potential talent out there looking to get into a role, but as employers, we're really invited to think about, what am I saying when I put this out here? What are my expectations? What am I demanding of that hypothetical other person?
Interviews are two-way conversations. If they're not two-way conversations, then run away.
I love the runaway advice. Yeah, you don't have to be too polite. You just be like, no, this is not for me. This is terrible. I'm out. Thank you. I'm out, if you want to be super nice. So we've heard quite a bit about the book. It's really exciting. Naomi, how far along are you? Are you both really?
I think we're about 50% of the way through. Books have their own life and they grow and change, but I have a feeling we're about 50% of the way through. That seems to be our agreement right now. But we have started posting sample chapters on the website and releasing a little bit of reading here and there so people can start to follow along with that.
Where is the website?
It's compassionatecoder.com, and we have that sample chapter there. We also have a forum where people can sign up to get updates on the book. And we also have a Patreon at patreon.com/compassionatecoder, and we're offering bonus content to people who pledge to support us as we're writing the book, including excerpts from chapters. And Naomi also had the idea to do some worksheets and workbooks for people who are looking to affect organizational change at their own companies.
So it sounds like this project, this book, is really looking to address empathy and technology on multiple levels. You're speaking directly to individual technologists while at the same time working to create material for workplaces or for teams.
The way the book is structured, it's taking you on a journey. It's taking the reader on a journey from just starting out in the field to becoming a solid individual contributor, to working with your manager or even becoming a manager, then your impact in a greater community by participating in conferences, by participating in open source, and even all the way up to becoming notable in your field. So we're really showing how empathy applies at every step of your career and every step in the process of becoming successful in your career. And our hope is that no matter what level the reader is at, they will find something that speaks directly to their experience and where they are in their life.
This sounds fantastic, but with it being sort of halfway done, are there any other resources you say, well, you know, it has a stopgap, you should come check out? Are there other things you all have worked on, or are there any external materials that you recommend?
Well, I think Coraline has covered a lot of where to go right now. We've just started releasing some sample chapters, and I really would like to move forward and create some worksheets. In terms of other resources, I think it's really challenging right now to find other resources on this topic, which is why we really want to bring it to people in a really hands-on, accessible way. We certainly talk about research, but we also get into a lot of practical things in the book. One other thing that Coraline hasn't talked about yet is that she's also been working on chapters in the book with empathy for the machine.
Oh, wait, what?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Like making friends with my future robot overlords?
Yeah, it's about, we do have a section about empathy in the code base where we talk about working with legacy systems and your relationship with the code and your relationship with the computer that your code operates on.
Oh, no, oh, yes, but I think I've been rather brutal to my poor computer.
Yeah. I go into the history of computing a little bit in this chapter, Empathy for the Machine, and I talk about something called the Doherty threshold, which is this point in time in the in the 1980s when computers were becoming more accessible, they had real performance problems because of hardware limitations. And the sort of holy grail was to get a response time of less than 400 milliseconds between a key press and something happening on the computer. And like I mentioned before, with assuming high-speed internet and assuming high-end hardware, we're actually, in many cases, throwing away the Doherty threshold and making our applications feel very sluggish. And we're very, in some cases, even separated from hardware considerations because our web applications are running on S3. And there's actually an environmental cost to bad computing. If you think about the harder you make your processor work, the more energy it's drawing, the more heat it's generating, and all of that has to be handled. And there's a real environmental cost to not empathizing with the machine.
Wow, we've got the opportunity to learn to empathize better immediately with our coworkers, our potential employers, the potential users, our existing users, each other, the world, computers. It sounds like we've got a lot of work ahead of ourselves.
The book is structured to give you both a scientific basis for why empathy is important. We talk about what happens when you think you're practicing empathy, but you're really not. But in all cases, we try to be both rational and make an emotional appeal and meet people where they are. And everyone has something to learn about empathy, and everyone can improve their empathetic practices, whether they are ranked beginners at it or think of themselves as empathetic people. So we're trying very hard to be practical, to meet people where they are, and everyone should be able to learn something from the book.
Fantastic. Though we all have a lot of work ahead of ourselves, it sounds like resources like your book might be really good first steps and really good guides to getting us there. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
And if somebody wanted to find you online to say hello or to learn more, where can they find you online?
As we mentioned, compassionatecoder.com, and on Twitter, I am at Coraline Ada.
And on Twitter, I'm at Naomi_Freeman.
And we are happy to engage with anyone who's interested in this topic.
They're so happy to chat about empathy. Be nice, dear listener. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us for our first Thursday episode. Join us next Tuesday for a special look at a really interesting Kenyan program aimed at mentoring new technologists.